5 people. Tories. By 1815, 2 political houses from the landed aristocracy dominated British Parliament, the Tories and the Whigs. The Tory faction had little desire in changing the political or electoral systems, as they were sure that their power threw holes on rotten boroughs, while new industrial cities were left with no representation in Parliament. When severe economic problems arose in Britain, agricultural prices began to fall, and the Tories responded by passing the Corn Laws of 1815. This legislation imposed a high tariff on foreign grain, causing the price of bread to rise substantially. With this basic staple rising in cost, conditions for the working classes became even more difficult. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith was a Scottish philosopher during the Age of the Enlightenment and wrote his inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations in 1776. This work illustrated a very strong argument for the laissez-faire economic system in which the government would stay out of the economic affairs and allow free trade and natural economics to flow. In his work, he states that the source of wealth for the country lies with its available labor source rather than available farmland. This relates to the current chapter in that the practice of laissez-faire was supported by the emerging liberalists of the time, who wished to return to the classical economics of pre-industrial revolution era because countries began creating foreign tax goods to protect their economy. Johann Gottfried Herder was a German philosopher, theologian, and literacy critic. Generally associated with the period of the Enlightenment, he promoted the language of German in his treatise on the origin of language, which may be seen as a budding nationalistic view. He argued that the idea of one's language determining their thought, and focused upon language and cultural traditions as ties to identify a nation. He later placed importance on the concept of nationality and patriotism, claiming that he who has lost his patriotic spirit has lost himself, and the whole world's about himself. This is early loyalty to the idea of one being politically loyal to one's national standing above all else. Johann Gottlieb Fichte was a German philosopher known to help in the fostering of the German idealism philosophy. In his addresses to the German nation, he endorses Germans under French rule to assert their Germanness, who values such as their language. It is important to note that the idea of the Germanness wasn't common in just one country, but instead the cultural region in Central Europe, and that these ideals emerged before a unified and single country of Germany existed yet. Louis Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, was the more liberal cousin of Charles X, who became his successor to the French throne during the July Revolutions. After the revolutions, Louis is soon referred to as the bourgeoisie monarch, for as his actions favored the upper middle class of France. Though he lowered the property requirements for male voters, they were still high enough so that the number of people who could vote in France reached 200,000 out of 23 million. Only the wealthiest of citizens could vote. This led to its eventual toppling as the growing industrial worker class was left in terrible conditions, and he was abdicated in 1848 after resistance from the radical Republicans and Socialists called for reforms. Earl Grey was the title held by Lord Charles Grey, the Prime Minister of Britain from 1830 to 1832. He is responsible for enacting the Reform Act of 1832, which disenfranchised many rotten or corrupt boroughs and enfranchised 42 new towns and cities. This recognition of changes wrought by the Industrial Revolution gave the new industrial community some voice in Parliament. Although a voting restriction was retained, that limited suffrage to mainly the upper middle class and above. It didn't transform the political landscape immediately, but gave the industrial middle class a place in the landed interests in Britain. Conservatism. To the right side of the political spectrum, conservatives bridged between the moderates and the reactionaries of the time. Politically, they stood for the traditional political systems, calling for the aristocracy to hold positions of leadership. They desired an economic system based on traditional agrarianism, with a majority of a country's workforce being devoted to commercial agriculture. In concern to social systems, they called for a re-establishment or upholding of traditional classes based on one's birth and privileges, all while claiming the necessity of an established Catholic Church for the state. Liberalism. To the left side of the political spectrum, liberals bridged between the moderates and the radicals. Politically, they stood for the institution of a limited constitutional monarchy allowing for limited male suffrage. They desired an economic system based off of industrial capitalism, with the government following the practice of laissez-faire allowing for free trade. In concern to social systems, liberals believed in equality of individuals, but recognized that certain individuals were born of privilege and wealth and desired to keep it. They also allowed for religious toleration while not endorsing a particular state religion. Nationalism. Nationalism is that arose out of awareness that being part of a community, a nation, should be the focus of an individual's primary political loyalty. It became very popular during the French Revolution, with the ideas that each nationality should have its own government and amongst German states which desired a cultural unity under a country. This threatened the balance of power, as united Germany or Italy would become dangerous, so this was repressed by conservatives throughout Europe. Young Italy. After the failure of uprisings in Italy, Giuseppe Mazzini emerged as the leader of the Italian Risorgimento, which moved towards Italian nationhood. He founded the Organization of Young Italy in order to pursue these goals of unification, claiming the failed attempts were a result of the misdirection of revolutionary efforts. This organization saw a moment of success when the province of Sicily and Venice turned on the Austrian rulers, but was put down by counter-revolutionary forces from the French. Iron Law of Wages. The Iron Law of Wages is a concept developed by David Ricardo in his Principles of Political Economy in 1817. He based his arguments off of Thomas Malthus's overpopulation ideas, outlining a cycle of population affecting the wages of the working class. Increase in population, more workers. More workers, wages fall. Wages fall, misery and starvation cause decrease in population. Fall in population, less workers. Less workers, rise in pay. Rise in pay encourages growing families. Growing families, increase in population.
Led by Prince Clemens von Metternich, they established a new balance of power called the Congress of Europe, placing most of the power to members of the alliance. This allowed for later domination of Europe by these powers, making Metternich a very powerful figure after the peace settlement. The Carlsbad Decrees were issued in a way to establish the national fraternities, including the Verstraete doctrine, and censored the press and replacing universities as the most logical in order to maintain the status quo. These fraternities became called the antiquities of the German government from 1817 to 1819, such as burning books by conservative authors on the 100th anniversary of Luther's 95 Theses, that seemed to be the start of a nationalistic revolt, which was slowly put down in the cost of Metternich. The Peterloo Massacre was a bloody result of a mass protest meetings used large cavalry attacked a crowd of 60,000 who had gathered at St. Peter's Fields in Manchester. The resulting 11 deaths were called out by government detractors, leading Parliament to take repressive measures such as banning the distribution of pamphlets months before and restricting public assemblies. The Decembrist Revolt of 1825 was a result of confusion as to who was assembled to the Russian throne after the death of Alexander I. Alexander's brother Constantine was the legal heir to the throne, but he renounced his claims in favor of his brother Nicholas. But he didn't do so publicly. When Nicholas ascended to the throne, the military leaders of the Northern Society, a secret society composed of aristocrats and intellectuals who opposed Alexander, rebelled. The revolt was quickly crushed, but shifted Nicholas from a relatively conservative leader to a reactionary who strengthened the secret police and bureaucracy. The Greek Revolt began in 1821 when the Greeks revolted against the Ottoman Empire. With aid from a British-French fleet, the and Russia helped by also declaring war on the Turks and attacking their territories. This is the first example of the principle of intervention being used to actually assist a rebellion, as the concert wished to drive out the Muslim influence. After Greece was considered free by the Ottoman Empire, Russia, France, and Britain declared peace of independent kingdom and established a new royal dynasty. The German Confederation was a division of the Holy Roman Empire, being states with Russia and Austria acting as the dominant powers. This confederation included power as the sense of legislation being the limit of citizen political action, making it very inadequate. The confederation was used to legally select rebellions to keep an eye on and repress any revolutionary actions of the German state. The states looked to Prussia for initial leadership with King Frederick William III, but he eventually became a reactionary and was happy to follow Metternich's wishes, placing any ideas of German unity on hold. The Holy Alliance was established immediately after the Napoleonic Wars, between Russia, Prussia, and Austria by the wishes of Tsar Alexander of Russia. The goal of the alliance was in order to promote the divine right of kings and Christian values in Europe. This alliance is considered the fostering element of the concept of alliances that created the culture of Europe. The Charter of 1814 was the constitution signed in by King Louis XVIII upon his ascension to the throne. This act was an acceptance of certain changes brought